Germany has decided in principle to buy F-35 fighter jets from the U.S. That's according to new reports citing government sources. Now, Berlin plans to drastically beef up military spending as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's not alone. Denmark and Sweden say they're also raising their military spending over the coming years. Now, traditionally, larger nations have spent more on defense. In 2020, the U.S. with a whopping $80 billion budgeted for defense. China only $252 billion on its military. But that still dwarfs Germany with 53 billion euros, or dollars, I should say. Now, that year, Russia had a military budget of $62 billion. That's 10 times what Ukraine spent. And while it seems much smaller than China or the U.S., it represents a greater share of the Russian economy. So which companies are the biggest players in defense? Well, U.S. company Lockheed Martin makes the F-35. That's one of the largest in the industry with sales of $66 billion last year. It's followed by Europe's Airbus and two more U.S. companies, Raytheon Technologies and Boeing. Now, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute tracks military expenditures around the world. I asked their senior researcher, Lucie Beraud Sudreau, to put recent events into perspective.
We are seeing at the moment strong announcements all across Europe, in particular for increased military expenditure, but also in Canada, which is also a NATO member. And of course, countries are reacting to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, and countries are actually now making decisions to increase their military expenditure and reaching the 2% target set by NATO, something they have been asked to do since 2014, but are now really making a move towards.
One of those countries, of course, Germany, announcing that it wants to stay with the 2% of GDP level for defense expenditures. So are we saying that we're seeing more countries that are spending that haven't traditionally spent as much in the past? Is that fair to say? Or is it more the usual suspects, China, the U.S., Russia?
What we are seeing is that an acceleration of the trend, in particular in Europe. So European countries had been already increasing their military expenditure for the past few years, in particular since 2014 and then Russia's annexation of Crimea. But this trend is actually accelerating. So there were increases that had been announced, but now there are increases on top of increases, so to speak. So countries, let's say, for instance, like Sweden or Poland, were already saying they were going to increase their military expenditure, but now they say they're going to increase even more. So we're going to see Europe as one of the key regions driving military spending forward in the coming years, not just the usual suspects, as you were mentioning.
Can we say what kinds of spending we're seeing? Is this for modernizing programs, for modernizations? Is it for new weapon systems? Can you break it down a little bit more?
It's too early to say because we are really just at the stage of announcements. So countries promising they're going to increase spending to 2% or more. Poland is even saying they're going to go to 3%. Germany says more than 2%. So, but really at this stage we don't know yet. There have just been a few announcements. I think you were mentioning the F-35 for Germany. But it's really too early to tell. I think one key question when it comes to Europe or NATO as a whole is how to coordinate all those increases. There are going to be billions of euros or dollars going to the modernization of armed forces, but how to make sure this is done in a coordinated fashion, that we don't duplicate, when we don't waste money in the process. I think there will be a really strong role for NATO and the EU in making sure that this is done in a coordinated fashion.